Hey there, BookTube. Noah. Everyone who reads It Must Converse is the channel. Appreciate you coming by again. I'm doing the second video in a Buddhist series. There's some interest in the elements of Buddhism, and so I figured I'd go through what I understand, and I welcome any feedback and any comments. Let me know what you want to hear on any of the videos. So this one here is elements of, we're going to touch on the traditional life of the Buddha and an esoteric mystical life of the Buddha through his lifetime. There's many schools of thought, of course, in Buddhism. So these kind of things flux and grow throughout the history of Buddhism and its movement through different cultures. Traditionally, the Buddha was Gautama Shakyamuni, which means Gautama, and from the Shakya clan. The Shakya clan is a group, like a small peoples, who lived on near, like the border of India and Nepal, very, very northern part of India. And they had some, area there that was their influence, had a king, had a palace, many, maybe a few palaces, things like that, and the peoples that they ruled over. Gautama was born a prince, and traditionally at his birth, there was a prophecy that said this son that you've had is going to be a great man, a very great person. It's going to go either one of two ways. Either he's going to be a king and he's going to lead your people to be more powerful and greater influence than ever before, or he's going to renounce the world and become a Buddha, a fully awakened being. That's what Buddha means. Buddha is a title, and the Buddha, a title of Buddha, is not something that originated with Buddhism, just like the title of Christ did not originate with just Jesus. The title is something that was in the nomenclature. So the king, hearing this, took every step that he could to give his son a very satisfying and life, which, of course wasn't hard. He's a prince. And so, he was very educated, very well educated, very well trained, very, very fit, a good, great all around, great at sports, great at, all different manner of things, worldly speaking. But what the king, his father, was very careful to do is to shield him from any kind of suffering or misery. At an advanced stage, not very, just a young adult. At a young adult age, the Buddha desired to go out from the palace walls. He was very sheltered, and shrewdly, in a way that he didn't really realize that he was sheltered, but he lived a sheltered life, not able to see the scope of the human condition, because his father wanted him to stay and to become a king and to follow in his footsteps. He wanted the Buddha at a point of young adulthood desired to go out of the palace and to see his land, to see his people. And so the king, sent people before, sent scouts before, and things like that, and said to remove anybody with a sickness, remove any old people. He didn't understand aging. He didn't know, he wasn't very worldly, just experience wise. He wasn't privy to certain things. So they had him, remove old people so that he didn't see, and things like that. So when the Buddha left out, of course, what happens is he catches glimpse of a monk. And he's like, who's that? Who's the guy in the robes? He catches a glimpse of, people in sickness. And he's like, why are they down? He's only seen happy people, in his life. Uh, only seen happy people, only seen people in good health. He's like, what's up with those people? And he sees uh somebody a funeral uh being given, and asks, what are they doing? And in those, the the people around him can't help but answer his questions. I mean, he's royalty, and they tell him, and very plainly, and then they, say, any explanations are going to be given by, your father, of course. He comes back and he questions his father, and his father tells him, I did, didn't show you these kind of things for your own good in your life, but that's how the world is. And he's like, well, why does it have to be that way? And there was no satisfying answer. And that question, why is there suffering in the world, gnaws at him until he renounces his king, his nobility. He leaves his wife and his son. He had a son named Raula. His wife is Maya, I believe, and leaves the palace and goes out into the woods. Now, so the Buddha is a very learned person, and meditation and things like this are part of the Hindu culture. I mean, everybody at that type is a Jainism, a Brahmaism, which is akin to Hinduism. And so that's the kind of culture that they're in. There's a lot of very deep religion there, but nothing very satisfying to the Buddha as far as to answer his question of why people suffer, why mankind suffers, and how to stop the suffering. And he goes into the woods where there's definitely a thriving culture of meditators, men who at the end of their household life will go and go to very ascetic extremes to gain some personal realization as far as who God is, Brahma. They call God Brahma. And so there's a thriving, culture there of wise men in the woods. And he goes and he is taught different meditation techniques, and they get ever so close to full enlightenment, like an awakening experience, but it's lacking, and Gautama can see that it's lacking. These followers that he goes to and gets taught by, they have disciples. They are very wise men that are very far along the path of realization, but Gautama can see that there is something lacking in their viewpoints in each one. So he goes off on his own. He goes off on his own and goes to extreme ascetic practice. Doesn't eat, eating a mustard seed a week or something like that. Just something, just very extreme, depriving the body. Very, very extreme practices and meditating all the time. Until at some point he he has an experience, and he sees that he has like a small group that he is practicing with, like five other guys, five other ascetics that are very, very extreme like him. He has an experience one day and realizes that either extreme, an extreme of decadence or an extreme of asceticism, are both wrong, and that the path is a middle way between all opposing extremes. Any pair of opposites, any opposing viewpoints and things like that, there is a middle way between those two, and that is the path to walk. So he realizes this, he takes this very, very deep, and he's already, a very, very advanced meditator, and has a level of self-realization that we probably won't even get to in our lifetime. But he realizes the middle way, a middle path between opposing extremes, and then he sits down once that realization is fully absorbed and put into practice in all of his thinking, and augments his thinking. He then sits down under a tree and says, I will not move from this spot until I gain enlightenment. 7 days, I believe, is what it is now. A traditional spiritual number, right? 7 days, he sat under the tree, and he realized all of it. Had the kind of awakening experience that he came out of it a Buddha. During that time, he realized causes, all the chains of cause and effect that create beings. He came face to face with Satan, who in that culture is called Maya, illusion, and he's the adversary, and he opposes um, Gautama, and his final, it's so good that the final kind of thing where he says, who gives you the right, who's the witness, even to what you're doing, who can bear witness to this and sanctify it. And he puts his hand down on the earth, and he says, the earth is my witness. Here's his place, here's where this is for, here's where we are, and that's what it's all about, is to work good in the world. And so he overcomes, he's tempted, kind of very much like Jesus is tempted by Satan as well. Comes out of it the Buddha. He walks back, and the ascetics see him, and they've already shunned him because he gave up his very extreme ascetic practices, and he comes back to them. And the 5 ascetics are the first people that he comes to after his realization and becoming a Buddha. And he sits down with them and gives them the first teaching, and they become his first disciples. From then on, his whole life, he walks around, stays in different places, and gives teachings to individuals. So there's just a quick overview. I'd like to touch on individual points in that if you want, but that's your traditional life of the Buddha. So then I wanted to touch, because it's super interesting and will give us a little bit of way into some of the different types of teachings that Buddhists have. I have a little cheat sheet here of the mystical life of Jesus, or of the Buddha, sorry. The mystical life of the Buddha, kind of like what it was like in a spiritual way, and I'm not saying that this is, how, nobody would be able to say what he did from day to day and from year to year in his life, because Buddhism was an oral tradition for 500 years after the Buddha's life. Even there was nothing written down for 500 years after he lived. He became a Buddha about 500 years before the Common Era. That's when the life of the Buddha, where it is in history, 500 BC. All right, so there's the enlightenment experience that the Buddha had. The first 3 weeks, the Buddha has an experience. For 3 weeks, he doesn't move from his own meditations under the tree, maybe getting some food and sleeping, something like that. But he's just meditating, and he's in the fullness of the awakening experience, pure enlightenment, absolute Buddhahood. And that is an experience of pure Bodhi. Bodhi is enlightenment, pure enlightenment, the absolute nature of everything and its complete correspondence. That is, that everything is equal. He can see everything as part of one whole thing. That is, the Christ experience, the God experience is all one. So he sees everything as equal, and that for 3 weeks went into that kind of place and just stayed there. For the first 12 years of his teaching, he taught what is traditionally in the Pali Canon, which is the Tripitaka, the three baskets. That is the Four Noble Truths, dependent origination, and the Eightfold Path. The Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path we touched on. Maybe I touched on dependent origination as well. But dependent origination basically is the chain of cause and effect, and what it illustrates completely, the way that it's presented in Buddhism, is it illustrates that nothing can exist on its own. Nothing is able to exist without other things. A flower can't exist without the soil, the rain, the sunlight, and rain can't exist without the earth, the sky, and the whole formation and the rotation of our planet, things like that. After those 12 years, the first 12 years of his teaching took another form. For 8 years, he gave esoteric teachings, and that is part of the Jataka Tales, which is his past lives, the 6 perfections of a bodhisattva. How I said pure Bodhi. Bodhi means enlightenment. A bodhisattva sattva means being. So a bodhisattva is a being that is his only concern, whether he's conscious of it, because when you're reborn, this is a cosmology that takes place under pretense of rebirths. You're going to be reborn over and over until you what? Gain something, gain enlightenment, gain an experience of what it absolutely is, kind of stuff. But we'll get more to that down the road. But he taught the 6 perfections of a bodhisattva. Those are the practices of every being that is looking to gain enlightenment, not only for their own growth and their own realization and their own attainment, but as to spread the enlightenment energy and love through all beings. So you're gaining enlightenment for the good of all. And those 6 perfections are generosity, kindness or morality, patience, energy, meditation, which is concentration, the same thing, and wisdom. He taught the emptiness through intuition or analysis. So gaining an experience of emptiness, not nothingness. Definitely different than just a blank nothing. Emptiness in a Buddhist term is a chaos of unlimited potential. It is a fundamental baseline for where everything is born from. Emptiness takes on an actual warmth, and life is there, in this emptiness. It's not a cold, dark nothingness. It is actually full of potential. And this is preliminary Mahayana teachings that mystically, in this kind of esoteric way of thinking, he gave it this time. Mahayana is is the kind of thing where the six perfections go out of. It is concerned with all beings, not just a practitioner in and of themselves, and that kind of thing is kind of hard to touch sometimes. The next 22 years after that, for the next 22 years, he gave perfection of wisdom teachings. Those kind of teachings are very, very hard to grasp, but they're essential for realization. If you don't understand that kind of stuff, then you will fall into one of these kind of paths that are very close to an understanding of the truth, but you'll actually be in a falsehood, and you'll think you're there, and you're not, and there's just, there's a block. It's tough. So, these kind of things, the kind of teachings that he would give is non-dualistic teachings at this point. Teachings that embrace two sides of an opposite pair as complementary and as necessary for each other, and uh, not having distinction between any actual things. Actual things, something like a thing, is called in Buddhism a dharma. An a thing, is a dharma, and all dharma is the same. You know what I mean? There's an underlying sameness, and these kind of things you'll anybody who's spiritually minded will see that these kind of things are in all kinds of traditions. There is an underlying, kind of oneness and a unity to our reality, and that is a truth, no matter how hard it is to touch in our daily lives or to even wrap our heads around. This is the perfection of wisdom, is what crosses the abyss of the mind, and that is the abyss of the mind is where you have all these facts and all these distinctions and all these different ways that you are categorizing things. And it's very, very hard to cross that. But the perfection of wisdom's texts, teachings do just that. And then the last 8 years after that, the last 8 years, he once again, like the first 3 weeks, the last 8 years he teaches pure enlightenment, pure dharma, the pure truth of what our reality is about. That is things like that reality is timeless. The real reality is timeless. Once again, there's complete correspondence. Everything is equal in these teachings. And a main thing is that all have Buddha nature. All have the potential within them to become a Buddha. So that is the same as saying in a Western way that all have Christ within us. The consciousness of Christ can flower in anyone. So in that way, that is the same thing as in that in Buddhism, that they would say all have Buddha nature within. And it's a very tough teaching to work out, but I'm prepared and want to go into even more of all this. So I hope you enjoyed this booktube, and if you have any questions or anything is interesting to you, just holler at me and give me any kind of comment or feedback, or just say, hey, yeah, more on this, please, and we'll do it. Thank you very much. Catch you on the flip side. Bye bye.